I am very humbled to be able to sit here and talk about the book that I've put together, and I'm also really pleased that Anna and the other the judges or the people who were deciding on the criteria were able to see that this is first and foremost an activist book. I am an academic, and so there is a saying in academia that if you don't publish, you perish, and so I do have to write academic books. But I came to the study of West Papua first as an activist. So maybe I can tell a little bit about my own background so you can understand why. So I was born in Australia, but moved to Michigan as a baby and then moved to Papua New Guinea and lived there until I was 8. My parents were raised in Papua New Guinea. My mum's American, my dad's Australian, but both sets of their grandparents were missionaries in PNG, which is the kind of family history. So I suppose from a very young age, I have had a love for Melanesian culture and Melanesian people, the family that I have in Papua New Guinea, and now quite a number of places in the Pacific. And then when I was older, when I was going through university, I became aware of the East Timorese struggle for independence. I then ended up working in East Timor at one point. This was just a couple of years after East Timor's right after East Timorese achieved independence. And I started thinking, why does East Timor have an independent nation state but not West Papua in their colonial histories, and so much about their histories are so similar? I remember saying something to my dad about that, and he said, you know what, if you want to be an activist in this life, you need to be an activist for West Papua because it's on our doorstep. And I thought, that's my dad's advice, But then I met a few West Papuan people in Sydney. And from that point on, I think it just seemed like everything was pointing me in my life to this direction. And so I started attending Free West Papua rallies and learning a lot more about West Papua. And when I did my PhD in peace and conflict studies, I decided to look into the decolonisation movement in West Papua. And what I've been bothered by for about 15 years now, since I've been working on the issue, is by this racist assumption that West Papuans are too divided, and that culturally they can't get their act together in order to have a unified independence movement or decolonisation movement. And so I set out to write about that in this book. And I've interviewed, I think I was saying here, about 75 people, West Papuan people in West Papua and in diaspora. So I'll believe myself when I say 75 in here. It did take quite a few years. And I asked them about their backgrounds, about why they believe that they will achieve independence, because the majority of West Papuan people do want independence, and they believe that it is their God-given right, and they believe that it is their human right, and they believe that that good will triumph over evil, that right will triumph over wrong, and that that their land will be decolonised. And not just that it will be decolonised, but they are doing the decolonisation. And so I wanted to kind of push back against this, this chorus of kind of naysayers, observers, people in international policy, and observers of the West Papua conflict that kept saying West Papua is too riddled with conflict and factionalism, and that's why they can't work together. And what I've found in this book is that it's the points of conflict which actually spark. So West Papuans are committed to unity, but not the kind of unity that Indonesia pushes, which is a kind of forced unity where people all have to be the same. No, it's celebrating the diversity, celebrating the many different languages, but becoming one through a shared goal, one which is decolonisation, one in shared attitudes to the land and to each other, as you're talking about with this idea of Tala Noa, but it's a love for each other, a care for each other. And there are all these beliefs and these ways that West Papuans are one, and when people do disagree, it tends to be that disagreements and factions come up around generational beliefs, around what strategy is going to get us there in the end, or sometimes it's about place of origin, sometimes it's about kind of big man politics, or it can be, there's so many origins of conflict, but that's not a West Papuan thing, that's not a Melanesian thing, that's not a Pacific thing, that's politics all over the world, right? I mean, look at any political movement and you've got conflict. Add to that a colonial oppressor who is committing genocide in the country, who, if you come out as a leader in West Papua, you are likely to be assassinated, who has told you you cannot speak your Tokples, your mother tongues, you cannot practice your Indigenous customs, who sees your culture as a weapon, which West Papuans do actually practice their culture as a weapon because they know how powerful it is. But, all of these things, how could West Papuans present a unified front more than they already have? Well, amazingly, over the past, I'm going to say 10 years now, the movement has become stronger and more unified. We have the United Liberation Movement for West Papua, which was established in 2014, where the three major factions came together under the leadership of the ULMWP. Now, another problem is that a lot of leaders are in diaspora, and then there's this kind of tension between diaspora and in-country. But what leaders say when I've interviewed them is, don't worry about leadership in the future. We'll work that out in the future. What we need right now is to work out how to get there. And so we have the ULMWP, which in 2015 was given observer status at the Melanesian Spearhead Group, and now they're working towards full status. Indonesia is incredible at diplomacy and is working really hard on Fiji and really hard on PNG to not recognise West Papua's right to self-determination, although Vanuatu has been fairly firm ever since Vanuatu's independence about supporting West Papuans' right to self-determination. But the thing is, what we're seeing is increasing support from Pacific Islands nations. I think that was one of the main points that I wanted to see. So we are seeing more support around the world. This is a result of Papuans never giving up. And now we've got we've got social media, and we've got different ways of communicating. We've got generations now West Papuan generations who who are much more well-versed in theories and experiences of colonisation and decolonisation, and haven't completely put their faith in the United Nations to solve the issue which earlier generations had seen. So they've seen the mistakes but also the successes of earlier generations, and they're saying, well, what do we need to do now? We need to network with civil society and pressure civil society to pressure their governments. And this is happening throughout the Pacific. There's an incredible solidarity, One Salwara movement for West Papua. In fact, West Papua decolonisation and climate change are probably two of the key kind of movements that are galvanising the Pacific at the moment. I don't know if you would agree with me, but that's just from what I've been witnessing. And many Pacific countries are taking up the issue of West Papua at the United Nations now. And so I say that while the possibility of independence for West Papua is not probable, it's still possible. It's still there. And it's there because Papuans have this absolute determination and strength of spirit and absolutely refuse to give up on a future for themselves. So I have just so many. The other thing I wanted to say is, if you want to read the book, it is full of stories. I've got stories from West Papuans where they use their culture. When I say as a weapon, it's a weapon in that they're trying to stay alive and they're trying to keep their cultures alive. And so, it's a tool in that way, but it's also a form of celebration and celebrating who they are and connecting to the homeland. So I've got stories from Papuans from Papua New Guinea, West Papuans in Papua New Guinea and Vanuatu, in England, in Sweden, in all over, and I've got Papuan voices throughout. So many points in here resonate with what I've heard from a lot of the issues that you've been talking about today. So I wish the book wasn't as expensive, but I do happen to know that you can get a Kindle version for about $13. So if you don't mind reading online, then that's a cheaper way to do it. So yeah. Thanks.
Thank you so much for what you do, what you've done, and what you continue to do. And
That's good.
I don't really have a question. question, you know, it's more like a comment, you know. The sub-region of Melanesia, you know, it's 15 million people. We have over 1,500 different languages. Vanuatu alone is 130 languages, so 2,000 people speak one language. And so we're quite diverse in that way, but we're also often seen, and I include West Papua in this, as a region that's wrought with, you know, so many issues and conflict. And we're called by development partners such as Australia.
Like the arc of instability. And this is
the arc of instability.
Yeah.
And which is why we need to bring back, you know, reclaim those narratives.
Absolutely.
And tell people that we are not the savages that they believe us to be and that they portray us to be.
This is the premise of the book, is that, you know, and what prompted me to write it, I think, was reading critiques of the movement and saying, well, if West Papua was to become independent, would it become a failed state? And I go, that is not even a question that a non-West Papuan person has the right to ask, because everyone has the right to self-determination, whether it be through political independence or whatever it is. It's up to West Papuans to decide how they want to, you know, run the way they live. Now, for us, for non-West Papuans who have spent the past 60 years either sitting on the sidelines and watching West Papuans be occupied, or have actually contributed to it, absolutely, or have contributed to it, maybe not, you know, like our governments have. Well, what our governments need to start doing is saying, if West Papua, how can we help West Papuans realise their right to self-determination? And then if that does take the place of an independent nation state, what can we then do to support that state and make it a successful state, rather than just treat it as a new place to exploit, a new country to exploit, like we've done to East Timor, you know. And so, yeah, I really push back against those narratives of instability and all of that, and, you know, saying that actually the Papua New Guinean Constitution is a phenomenal piece of work that was put together by a lot of different people with a lot of thought. You know, there are a lot of problems in Pacific Islands governments, but there are a lot of problems in lots of different governments. This is not a Pacific issue. This is not, and, you know, people say, well, you know, can't West Papua, can't we work to minimise or eliminate human rights abuses in West Papua without independence? At what point do you give up on that question and say, well, it hasn't happened in 60 years, so what is going to change now? And also, I mean, sure, we always want to work for human rights regardless of what the political situation is like in a country, but that is beside the point. The point here is that the right to self-determination has been denied West Papuans, and that is what we all need to be focusing on. And West Papuans can then work out how to honour human rights in their country, but that's a problem for the new government, right? That's not, yeah. Sorry.
I was going to add that for Vanuatu, our stance is very clear, that, you know, the Melanesia cannot be independent until West Papua, until all our brothers and sisters are independent. And so we don't consider that we're fully independent until West Papua is independent. Yeah. And so, like in the children's books that we do, I was showing you Andy Ayamasiba, the late Andy, and telling those stories and the flag and what it's about, and that fight for freedom, Tino Rangatiratanga, as the Maori say in New Zealand, because of the Treaty of Waitangi that's in place. And, you know, like, I think, who are we to say? In Vanuatu, we've kicked out the French and the British. We're making our own mistakes. That's our right to do that.
That's right. Everyone has the right to make their own mistakes.
Exactly.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. And so I guess the journey for me has been an incredibly rich and joyful one, and I've, you know, built a family. So I would think I was saying this to you, Dahlia, earlier, that when I first started out with my PhD and I went to a meeting in Vanuatu, it was the first meeting of the West Papua National Coalition for Liberation. I think it was in 2007, and my PhD supervisor had sent me instead of him, and he said, "Cami can talk." And I sat up the front and I was surrounded by all these very famous West Papuan leaders from around Papua, and I told them that what I wanted to do my PhD on, and they were like, who is this person? And then they said, all right, if we tell you our stories, we don't want you to just go off, publish them, go off, or, you know, get your PhD, get your own academic credentials, and forget about us. you know, and you hear this over and over, this is what non-Indigenous people do to Indigenous people. Take the knowledge, publish it, and then, you know, don't do anything with it. And so I said, you know, I will commit now to it being a lifelong issue for me as a fellow human being who lives in the Pacific, but not just a Pacific human, like a fellow human being, you know. But yeah, I don't want you to clap for me. Like, yeah, I mean, I appreciate that, but yeah, it's an issue, like it's a human issue, right? And yeah, it's on our doorstep, and it's so under, like Anna said, it's hard to find a book about it. There are some brilliant academic books. It would be fantastic if we could try and find some academic, and I can certainly help to try and find a West Papua novelist to, or, you know, yeah.
I'm sure I've had difficulties in finding that and making them comfortable to come along to something like this.
Yeah, and
I guess is what has been the main issue. That was really a personal, you know, something I feel very strongly about, because we grew up, I went to school in Port Moresby under the constant threat of it. Like, we used to, in places like the US, they used to hide under the table to avoid the nuclear bombs. Yeah. I've read that, I wasn't there. In Port Moresby, as a kid in primary school, we always had drills about what we were going to do when we were invaded by Indonesia. You get trained into this mental attitude, and we never understood, what was the difference between Papua New Guinea, Papua.
But there's not a lot of, I mean, there's difference in as much as there's difference between any. Yeah.
It's one eye.
Yeah, exactly. With an artificial. One of my West Papuan friends calls it the coffee and pencil border, where a bunch of like diplomats were looking over the map one day over coffee, and they're like, shh, oh look, there's a river there, we'll put a little, there we go. Yeah, and so I did spend a short amount of time in West Papua, and I went in as a volunteer because you can't do research there as well. Maybe if you're doing some kind of medical research or something, but it's impossible to get a research visa. So I went in to do volunteer work. My background is in development, so I was doing HIV and kind of anti-gender-based violence work while collecting information for my PhD. And as a white person, I was probably fairly safe there because I stood out so much. But I did have moments where I did feel quite afraid for my safety, and I thought, if this is how I feel in a 4 to 5 week period working here, I can't even imagine the trauma, like the ongoing trauma that, you know, my West Papuan friends who live here all the time and have no escape route are feeling. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.